Hello, everyone. Welcome to the latest CTO Craft Bytes. In today's discussion, we'll be covering our topic on mastering transitions in startups, scale-ups, and beyond. If this is your first time at a CTO Craft Bytes, let me tell you a bit more about what they do. So the CTO Craft company provides a learning and mentoring community for senior technology leaders with a community of thousands of leaders, annual conferences, mentoring groups, and one-to-one coaching, as well as exclusive courses and workshops through the campus platform. Community membership is free, so if you're leading technology teams, you should definitely get involved, and you can go to our website to find out more. My name is Hannah Van Nostrand. I am the Senior Content and Production Manager at CTO Craft, and today I'm here with our panelists, Coraline, Hizam, and Kirsten. I'm going to let each of you introduce yourselves. Coraline, why don't we start with you?
Hi, Anna. Thank you very much. So, I'm the ex-CPTO of a contact startup and the proud creator of Tesado.ai, which is a SaaS B2B web software automating the design and feasibility studies of construction projects. And I'm an engineer by background. I have worked in startup and scale-up as a product and tech leader pretty much my entire career, from very hands-on one-woman band role to higher level strategy, C-suite level position, and very glad to be here today.
Thank you, Coraline. Hizam?
Hi, everyone. I'm Hizam Sahibuddin. I'm the Chief Technology Officer at Chipmunk. I joined the company about 7 months ago, bringing with me a wealth of experience from my previous roles in the tech industry. At Chipmunk, I lead the technology strategy and oversee the development and implementation of innovation solutions for our e-commerce warehouse fulfillment platform. Throughout my career, spanning over 20 years in the tech industry, I've had the privilege of guiding tech teams through various stages of growth, from early stage startups to large enterprises. This diverse background has equipped me with valuable insights into the unique technological challenges and opportunities at each stage of a company's growth journey. At Chipmunk, I'm applying some of these experiences to further enhance our technological capabilities and drive innovation in the tech fulfillment space. We are really at an exciting stage where we're leveraging technology to optimize operations and deliver exceptional value to our customers. So today I'm excited to share some of my insights from both my current role at Chipmunk and my past experience.
Thanks so much, Hizam. And Kirsten.
Yeah, hi, my name is Kirsten Attelstetter. Thank you for having me. Very excited to be here. So my background has been predominantly financial services tech and industry, not particularly known for its focus on good product. It's one of those bizarre industries that doesn't believe in having a product role. And so I've been very used throughout my entire career to have to basically own both hats in order to create something that was actually useful. So I spent about 10 years in various C-level positions across the city, from small startups, scaling them into listed organizations. And for the last 2.5 years, I've been working independently, advising organizations predominantly at that scale up inflection point on how to effectively master the transition, how to grow the organization in a way that would ensure that delivery still happens, which is, as probably many of you have experienced, harder than it looks from the outside.
Thank you, Kirsten. So before we dive into our conversation, for our audience who are listening in, you can ask your questions at any time from the Ask a Question tab on the side or the link below the video, and we'll try to get as many of these as we can during the discussion. The session will be recorded and you can rewatch on this platform afterwards. So without further ado, let's jump into our conversation. Coraline, As a chief product and technology officer, how do you balance the dual aspects of product innovation and technology leadership? And what team structures or product types best benefit from this hybrid role?
Yeah, so I'm sorry, just a disclaimer, my video freezes a little bit, so I didn't get the first half of the question, but I think to me, right?
Yes.
Oh no.
Classic technical difficulties.
Yeah, she froze.
There she is. Can you hear us?
Yeah, I can. It's the video keep freezing. So Isham, do you want to take that one until I sort out my internet connection? Thank you.
Sure, of course, I can jump on that. So I think the role of a CTPO, it really depends on the scale of the business, what kind of skill sets required to lead the business, and also depending on the leadership that we have in engineering. Ultimately, end of the day, I feel or believe that tech is an enabler to solve actual problems. And oftentimes, if you think of product development, which consists of multiple different cross-functional groups of people, solve actual problems, right? You need to identify what's the value proposition, what is the viability of solving this problem, do we get the job done? Would the customer actually want to pay money because we got the job done for them? And then understanding the feasibility, can we build this within the constraints that we have in the current existing organization? And finally, with a lot of the newer product that has been coming out in the last 20 years, I think usability is almost a must have in today's day. Everyone expects a very intuitive usability experience to whatever problems that we solve for our customers. So with that, oftentimes you need like 4 different people to kind of cover all those areas. But in some very specific or special situations, you find the unicorns that can do all those 4 different things. So this is when you have to decide whether a CPO is needed or whether a CPTO can get the job done. And same applies to the organizational structure. If you have a strong leader for the team that is able to navigate those challenges, one person would be sufficient. Otherwise, you would need a dedicated product manager and an engineering leader to work together, almost joined to the hip to solve those problems.
Yeah, absolutely. Cor, if your internet's connected, do you want to add anything to what
Yeah,
his?
I think I really agree with Isam. Like in my situation, it was a very much like a
I think we lost her again.
be a matter of very tricky. Sorry about that.
You're
No,
back.
Cor, if it helps, maybe turn off your camera for a little bit and see if that will clear up some bandwidth.
I can do that. Sorry about that. So yeah, I was saying my situation is a little bit different. I became the CPTO very organically. So at the beginning, it was very much a one-woman band, and we had this idea of the tech, and the tech was very innovative. So I had to really, as a startup, be mindful about the sort of talents that we recruit and the skill set that we needed. So it was very much a decision to recruit the engineers and the tech first, and then I would take charge of all of the product function, and I started to recruit and scale the product function slightly later, which is kind of when I had my life back, if I'm honest. So that was interesting as well. But I think it's really about knowing your own strengths and your own weaknesses, making sure that you surround yourself with complementary people. So if you have a CPTO and a CTO that works really well together, that's great. If you are the CPTO and you're more a product-led person, then you need to make sure that you've got a VP of engineer that is extremely strong with very open and transparent communication with your engineers. So you make sure that people can really raise the challenges that they face, and to make sure that you listen to them and you really trust them. Same thing the other way around. If you're more engineer-led and if you're stronger in that area, then you need to make sure that you've got a VP of product or someone in a product section of the business that you can trust to be complementary to your skill set. So I think it's a balance exercise, and it also depends on the size of the company where you're at. I was the CPTO because we were a scale-up company. In the future, I don't know if that was the right configuration, team configuration, and if I would continue to do that, or maybe if we would split the function in a bigger business. That's also something that we considered very much.
Yeah,
I mean,
sorry, go on, Chris.
And just add, I think it's important to remember that there is no technology without a good product. And sometimes it's easy to get carried away with, but like, we're going to have to make sure this scales, and we're going to have to make sure this is, engineers, obviously, they're very proud of the work that they do. So instilling a mindset of lots of customer interaction, lots of experimentation. We're going to build this with the mindset that we might have to throw it away. I still have, I'm very lucky to have a very good mentor who comes up with all these catchphrases that then sort of stick in your mind. And one of the ones that I keep quoting is the second one pays for reuse, which is effectively the idea that no, you don't go in and consider all the use cases that a particular bit of code is potentially supposed to do at some stage. You write exactly what you need for day one. And if you then find that you need to reuse it, then the second effort is making it abstracted in such a way that it can then continue to be reused more easily going forward. But trying to avoid sort of this premature optimization, but what if we suddenly have 10,000 active users at the same time? But you're kind of bringing people back to reality, which can sometimes be challenging. But I think that mindset of experimentation and that idea of we're probably going to throw this bit away or rewrite it so significantly that we don't want to waste time. What we're trying to do is learn. What we're trying to do is answer questions that we have and really question our assumptions. Like, we go in with an assumption saying we think people are going to find this useful. Let's do the minimum necessary to answer that question, or to cement that assumption, or to disprove it, to then, and trying to balance your teams and the mindset they bring in that way as well.
Yeah, I love it. And I mean, kind of as Corin Hizam also mentioned, the size of the company matters as well. So how has your role as a leader evolved as your company transitioned from a startup to a scale up? And what were the most significant changes you had to adapt to? Hizam, do you want to start us off?
Yeah, I can. I think it's a very good question, right? And I've been privileged to be both in a startup and a scale up and in a larger enterprise at some point in my career. When you're in the stage of a startup, your role as a CTO really means you're doing everything, right? It could mean you're the developer, you're the legal sometimes, you're also HR sometimes. Essentially, it's an anarchy mode. You do whatever it takes to get the business going. But also at the same time, you usually don't have a lot of customers at that stage. So you really get to do whatever you want to do because the impact is really not that big. But as you start scaling and growing, now you have customers, you have revenue coming in. Naturally, your role needs to change. You start to hire more people. You cannot necessarily be in every technical decision. You can't necessarily determine what tools that every team needs to use. You have to start building up an organization that can really be more independent. So this is when your role really becomes more of a coach and mentor for your team and not necessarily be on the critical part. And the role also gradually becomes more crucial to be horizontal rather than vertical. So there's sometimes this term that's called team one, team two. I don't really like the word, but it kind of shows what it really means. So as a CTO, your team is really working closely with the other C-levels, right? Working closely with the other departments, so making sure that, as Kristen pointed out in the earlier, technology on its own is really, I feel, not useful, right? It has to really solve a user's problem, and that's where product comes in, right? And that product needs to be meaningful for the user. If it just solves a problem, but if it doesn't necessarily bring value to the business, that also could be a problem. So navigating that becomes much more important as you grow. And then as you go further and further, then it becomes more important, depending on the type of products you have, engaging with customers, trying to understand what are the challenges our customers are facing. How can tech help them with those challenges becomes a very important role. So yeah, I think sometimes that particular transition does not necessarily fit for everyone, because if you really enjoy being close to the tech and writing code on a daily basis, it will become more challenging. But in my experience now, I do still get involved at the tech level, but mostly on the system level architecture, on the non-functional requirements to make sure that it can scale and it can grow.
Yeah, absolutely. Kirsten, anything to add to that?
Yeah, I think it's an interesting point, right? As the organization scales, sometimes you also have to realize where you are not the right fit anymore. And I think everybody needs to decide for themselves where they are most effective, rather than trying to be everything at every stage of the growth of an organization. And it takes a hell of a lot of self-awareness to say, actually, until here and no further, or actually this is too early for me. I'm better in a different place. I think what's interesting, though, what I would say is maybe the thing that doesn't or that shouldn't change is as important as all the things that are changing, which is trying to retain that culture of getting things done, of being customer focused, of, again, this sort of idea of experimentation, of working together as cross-functional teams, as avoiding the things that happen so often that you kind of end up in silos because it's not like you would choose to do it that way. You just sort of slide into it, and you have to actively work against that in order to create that cross team collaboration and communication. And I think as a CPTO or CTO or CPO, it's important that you retain that seat at the table, because what you do enables the organization, and you need to be careful that as the organization grows, you retain that spot among the leadership at eye level, at partnership, at advising your non-technical colleagues sometimes what the good choices are, or what, which things to avoid, or how to make their vision come true. You might have a CEO that wants to rule the world, and that's great, but so you end up becoming a coach to your co-workers at the same time as you obviously then end up having a very different role in a scale up as a compared to a startup.
Yeah, and I really resonate with both of those answers. I think it's very comprehensive. I would say the challenge that I had for me was to remain, as you said, Kirsten, is to remain very close to both level, very close to the C-suite, close to the CEO, building that trust both ways, but also close to the engineers and the product manager and the product, and making sure that you really understand their challenges and you can be their voice in the C-suite and you fight their battles. Because ultimately, the way I would describe my role was never that the team would do what I asked them to do. It was more like for me to serve them, to create an environment that would allow them to be the best self and to perform the way that we're asked to do, and to give them the best environment to produce the best tech and the best product.
Yeah, absolutely. And Hizam, you said earlier, technology on its own doesn't solve the problem. So obviously strategy also takes a big part. So with the scaling of Shipmonk, what strategies did you implement to ensure your tech infrastructure could keep up with the growth?
Right. I mean, there's a few strategies that I've implemented. I mean, I think the most obvious one would be trying to leverage cloud solutions. We did still run a few software and hardware on-premise. We run warehouses that provide fulfillment services. And as you scale and grow, as you get more and more customers, it just becomes very, very expensive to keep having IT support that swaps hardware and maintain the hardware. So I think that's the most obvious one. Everyone naturally would tend to want to start in the cloud, but if you're not, if you want to move to a cloud, that's what we did. Starting to also think about scalable architecture. Naturally, as Shipmon, we started with a monolith, which was the best option when you're small, and then as you grow, it becomes a bit more challenging to navigate through the monolith. So we strategized to break the monolith up into modular monolith and then optimize it more individually. So the blast radius is reduced, and a lot of these teams also get a lot more independence on it. Some of the other strategies that we've put in place is automation. We want to automate everything and anything that can be automated. So we're not doing same thing over and over using engineering resources. Monitoring, that's the other thing that I put a lot of emphasis in as we grow and scale. We want to monitor, have a lot of observabilities, have automation and alerting so that whenever there's anything that goes out of what is expected, we get notified and we can address it in a best possible way, rather than being called at the middle of the night when things are just not working as we expected. And then, of course, one other thing that keeps I don't think there's a pure science to it. It's really management of tech debt. It depends on who you talk to. That's going to have a different definition. A lot of times when you're a startup, you get pushed really hard to like experiment, do it as fast as possible, come up with an MVP, come up with a POC. But then you don't realize all of that needs to continue to iterate to be made better and not accumulate those stats. And oftentimes it gets forgotten because you're just busy and you get pushed to do new things. So I think management of tech debt is something you have to put a lot of emphasis and also help all the other executives that are non-tech to understand what does it mean by tech debt, because there's also concepts of product debt, right? So you will have to navigate through a lot of this as you grow. So that needs to be part of the strategy. We try to bake all of that into the OKR format because it helps everyone to understand what it is. It's public and it has clear metrics to define the outcomes.
Nice. And Kirsten, from your experience on the side of advising tech leaders, what common leadership challenges arise during a company's growth phases and how can they be effectively managed?
So I think for me, there are two clear ones that you encounter quite a lot of the time. And I sort of hinted at it earlier when I said, the person that started the thing isn't necessarily always the best person to then also grow it and grow it beyond a certain scale. I think on the people side, it's learning when to step back, when to get out of the detail. People are naturally always very passionate about the things that they do, particularly in the startup world where you pour a lot of your soul into the solutions that you create. And then having to learn to delegate, to trust, to communicate in a way that, you often hear the words of like, by the time I've explained it to somebody, I might as well do it myself. And you're just like, no, because that doesn't scale. So you have that sort of hero effect, as we often call it, where, you have that single point of failure in a human because they are struggling to sort of step back and actually think about the bigger picture, think about organizational structure, think about reporting lines, all of these things that are not quite as exciting and sexy, but are absolutely necessary in order to make that transition work. And on the other side, when you think more about how do we get work done, when you have a small organization, naturally almost, everybody talks to everybody else. And it's usually quite clear to everyone, like, what are we trying to achieve? Where are we going? What matters most to the business? As you grow, if you don't deliberately over communicate these things, then that sort of alignment just gets lost really, really easily. So, really happy to hear that, Hizam mentioned OKRs. It's kind of one of the things that I've sort of been semi-obsessed with ever since I've come across the concept, and I've applied it across a number of different organizations, both when I was there, doing the operating as well as when I was advising. And it's the thing that they do isn't, no matter how you implement them or the methodology or the details, the thing that they do is to make it really clear what matters most right now. And also the point of, nobody's saying that thing you care about isn't important. It's just not as important as these other things. And for the moment, here's where our direction of travel is. And these are the things that matter. And there was, I think it was the LinkedIn chairman who said, when you're tired of saying it, they will start to listen. And that's exactly the thing you have to do about your organizational strategy and your corporate goals. It's like you have to communicate. Again, not the sexiest thing ultimately, because you do feel like you're constantly repeating yourself. And the number of times I've heard from people say like, but I've told them this so many times. I was like, yeah, and then you're going to do it again. That's a process that is quite natural in a startup, because again, everybody always has that conversation. But as you scale, you need to think about a communication strategy and how you're going to get people involved in the setting of OKR, so that they're not disenfranchised, that they feel like their voices are being heard, while at the same time they understand the context the business is operating in. The bigger the distance gets between your sort of junior engineer and the CEO in the company, the more work you have to do to shorten that distance again. And that takes quite a lot of effort and work. And when you then have a technical leader who really would rather solve this nasty algorithm problem over here, you then, that can be interesting challenges to resolve.
Yeah, brilliant. I mean, I like what you had to say, as well as like learning to delegate, but also learning to trust, and embracing kind of the passion of your team as well. So as for all of our panelists, how do you maintain a culture of innovation across hybrid work environments, especially when your team is distributed across different locations? Core, do you want to?
Yeah, I can jump in. The team that I had was very much distributed across different continents, sometimes different time zones. So we had to, very practically speaking, adapt to the sprint event ceremonies and all of that to make sure that everyone could do their work technically. But I don't think, to me, I don't think it really is a problem in terms of location, in terms of innovation. I think the culture of innovation comes whatever environment you have. It's kind of built in the company, as opposed to, it's not really a question. It's especially in tech and engineers roles, it's very common to have people working from home because they have a better setup, because, like, to be honest, the office situation after COVID is not ideal when you spend quite a long time coding and you have everything that you need at home. So I think being very flexible and trusting your team is very important. And for me, it's more around allowing them to be creative and giving them an environment for them to express that creativity, and not always talk about KPI, objectives, OKRs, whatever you want to listen. It's really important, don't get me wrong. It's fundamental that these are in place and everyone understand the vision and everyone understand the objective. But what I found very interesting is to maintain workshop or spaces where people could really express their creativity freely and bring forward ideas, no matter where you are in your career, no matter if you're a junior engineer, if you're a tech lead, if you're the CTO of the company. There is a room for you to basically express what you want to do and what you find very cool, what you find very interesting, to make presentation to other people, to talk about things that are not necessarily related, and to feel heard and seen when you express those thoughts. To me, that's how you create innovation and trust in your team as well.
Hizam, Kirsten, what are your thoughts?
I agree. I think innovation itself is probably not 100% correlated to being hybrid or remote or co-located, but I do believe I've been fortunate enough to start my career in a world where we were all co-located in one place, and it was a whole different world when we talk about innovation, right? We were all in one room. We spent a lot of time having lunch together. We continue to innovate, and sometimes after work we continue to innovate. And I know the world has changed now. It's almost close to impossible to have everyone in one location. So it's more about how do we navigate that constraint, it starts with hiring the right people. Some people are better suited to work effectively while being remote or hybrid, and others are just not able to do that very effectively. It also depends on what type of company it is, whether it's a, let's call it sales led or product led. That also changes how innovation is defined. Tools that are available, what type of tools that we have, and how do we accommodate that asynchronous communication while innovating. End of the day, it's also, as Coraline mentioned, it's providing that space, right? Because it's physics. If you're constrained with time, if you're just busy doing work, you just don't have the space to be creative and innovative. So it does not come for free. It's obviously a cost. So as leaders, we need to find ways to provide that space so that teams can be innovative.
Yeah, I would concur. I think I recently read somebody that like a quote that effectively says innovation is applying existing knowledge in novel situations. And the way to get that is to create that space for people to bring the knowledge, but also not that I want to bang the diversity drum, but that's really where diversity comes into its own. It's bringing different people from different backgrounds, different stages of life, different experiences together to solve a problem. And I do actually think that OKRs can be a very nice framework for fostering innovation, because if you're doing them the way they're intended, you're framing an outcome. You're not dictating how to get there, but you're saying, like, right, this is where we want to get to. How do we do this? I find there's a few sort of exercises and games that I like to play with my teams. For instance, to say, okay, we have this problem. This is what we're trying to solve. What would we do if we only had a month, right? And because sort of scarcity fosters innovation, right? So all of a sudden, the answers on the ideas and the plans get adjusted and become slightly more, bite size, rather than often, again, engineers often like to build great big systems. So letting them run with that, with a 1 month framework for a while, I then switch gears and say, okay, what would happen if we only had a week? What could we accomplish in a week that would help us? I was talking about experiments earlier, and learning and questioning assumptions and making sure that what you think the customer wants is actually what the customer wants. So then you're kind of restricted down to a week, and people will sit there and groan and say it's not possible, and then you just have to kind of go with it and kind of go like, well, what if? Just humor me, amuse me, and if you want to be really nasty, you then go to a day and say, okay, by the end of the day, what could we do? And sometimes there are very obvious things that people just don't think about. We could go out into the street and ask people, right? And we could ask 50 people on this. Again, it depends on your product, obviously, but by the end of the day, we would have some data, and we don't need to design a perfectly executed survey or analysis piece, but we could just talk to people, for instance. So I find that a very effective way to kind of tease out things that people otherwise might not think about. I do agree, though, as well, that collaboration and innovation in person has a whole different feel to it. So as a leader, I would make sure that you spend time, money, budget on creating those opportunities for people to come together. You don't have to do it. We don't have to be in an office day in, day out. We definitely don't. But I used to love, big whiteboarding sessions with my teams. We would block 2 days and we would say, okay, that meeting room is blocked for us. We get some pizzas in, the kind of the, slightly stereotypical approach, but like sticky notes, whiteboards, and a problem, go, what are we missing? What are we not doing well enough? And trying to reframe the question in different ways. All of these things are possible, whether you're remote, hybrid, or on site. You just have to be conscious of creating that space. Final thought is, when particularly when sort of engineers come and say, "Oh, found a new tool and it's really cool, and shouldn't we adopt it across the entire organization?" Giving them time to experiment by time boxing it. Your usual sort of, coding Fridays or whatever people call them, they tend to fall by the wayside when things get busy, right? But actually, so many interesting things can emerge out of these opportunities these days. So making sure that you create that space and say, I don't know, even if it's just once a month or the last day of the month or whatever, that's our day where we do minimum support. Obviously, we keep the lights on, we support the business, but we put down tools on our OKRs or whatever work we're doing, and just pick a problem that annoys you and see whether you can solve it. And automation comes out of these things that you can then actually roll out across the organization, and makes you a better, more effective and efficient organization as a result.
If I may, just to add on top of that, it's still super fresh in my mind. I was traveling to the US, and we were in Pennsylvania in one of our fulfillment centers, and we had a week that we called the FC Blitz, Fulfillment Center Blitz. We had representative from product management, engineering, operations. We also included associates from the warehouse to be part of this group. So going back to creating that space, so we bring in all that diverse perspective from all the business. We sat together. We actually literally started the day at 6:30 together with the associates in the warehouse, walking around the warehouse, trying to do the different jobs that they're doing. And we actually managed to come up with two very, very innovative solutions to solve that problem in just a span of a couple of days. So I could not agree more, right? It's something that has to be created and built for, right? Regardless of where you're from. We were people from Berlin, from Czech Republic, from the US, from all around the world coming together and just solving that problem in an innovative way.
Love it. So we talked about the innovation side of hybrid working, but we have a question from the audience who wants to know, what metrics do you use to measure effectiveness of hybrid and or cross-functional work, and how do you adjust them as the company grows? Leave the floor open to whoever wants to take a stab.
I can go. I think there's no one metric that has given that answer to me. I do use, I would say, many different metrics at the same time. So that really removes the need to force anyone to be in one location or in different locations or wherever they are, right? So the basic one, I think, that's currently being used in the industry is called the DORA metric. So you understand what is your lead time to change, your deployment frequency, your change failure rate, and your mean time to recover. I don't think I need to go into the depths of it unless anyone needs me to. But I also believe that DORA metrics on its own is really useless, right? Because you may be going fast, but still nowhere. So it just gives you one perspective of productivity. The second metric that I use is actually team health, like how happy people are in the team. So I tend to use a simple 1 to 5, like how you feeling this week. Simple as that, just to kind of gauge how everyone's mental health is. And then, of course, now that you have the DORA metrics and the team health metrics, I go into the outcome metrics, right? I'm also a bit obsessed with OKRs. I think it has a really nice, if done correctly, it forces us to think about outcome, and then it frees up everyone to go and find a solution. I think that's what truly promotes innovation. So if we're moving the leading metric of the OKR, I think we're heading in the right direction. So these are kind of the different metrics that I've used at Shipmonk to really measure productivity of the team, regardless of where they are.
Yeah, I think it also really depends on what stage you are. You're not going to have the same metrics when you're a startup and the same metrics like when the product is in development or where the product is in operation, delivery, and acquiring customer. When you are in a stability phase or when you're a growth phase, it really, I think, well, Kirsten, you talk about OKR, and I think it really goes back to the main objectives of the company right now. What is the most important for the company? What do you want to achieve as a company? What is your target? And then everything else kind of trickle down from that main objective. How do we make sure that, those objectives are being attained? What is the strategy to get there? And that's going to lead naturally to the metrics that you need to look at. But I really like what Isam said about including team health and including people's well-being. I don't think So to me, like if people get up in the morning and understand why they do what they do, and understanding why they're being set with a certain objective, a certain target, and what purpose, what is their role and their place in the team, that says a lot about productivity. And you don't really need to check what they're doing, be behind their back, or make sure that they log on at specific time and stuff like that. I think that's a very not a very healthy way to manage your team. And if that's the situation that you're in, then you need to really understand where the discontent is coming from, and to address that first and foremost.
Yeah, I would agree. I don't think I would have specific metrics to measure whether hybrid working environments are effective. I would look at, are we getting the stuff done that we're supposed to be getting done? Where are the bottlenecks? Where are the delays? If we're struggling to release, why is that? Yes, sometimes obviously you have to then look at your tech and make sure that it supports you. Not able to log into Teams this morning, despite trying to do my two-factor authentication 3 times. Obviously, these things are annoying, and these only really happen when you do have a hybrid setup, particularly when you travel between different countries, and sysadmins have restricted the location to UK only. But but I would look at, are we getting stuff done, and are people happy? And I think that's really important. I've done team retrospectives that have specifically focused on health of the team in the past, and usually again, depending on the size of the organization, but like on a sort of monthly basis, asking people to answer how they feel. Are they happy to come to work? Are they enjoying the work that they're doing? How they're doing outside of work, right? The big thing about hybrid working is that it's supposed to enable us all to maybe juggle a little less and talk less about like a hard delineation of work-life. Work-life balance can look very different to very different people. So kind of figuring out how to cater for that, and like having conversations with in your one-on-ones, maybe have a few skip level one-on-ones to kind of check in. Again, depends on the size of the organization. You don't need any of that sort of massive process in the small early stages. But as you grow, as you start to have 40, 50 engineers in different locations, different situations, different age groups, right? We often think about kids and the responsibilities there, but when you get to a slightly older stage, suddenly your parents become the care issue that you might have to take care of as well. And so focus on, are we getting stuff done, and how's everyone feeling, and what do we have to fix? And like I love a retrospective, but they're only effective if you go out of there with very concrete things that you're going to change and you commit to changing. So again, I tend to force the team to agree on 3, because usually, there's loads of ideas, and it doesn't help if we come out with loads of ideas and none of them happen. So I get the teams to pick the top 3 things that they're going to change, assuming it is obviously within their power to do so. And I like to have owners against these. It doesn't mean they have to do that single-handedly, but they're responsible for ensuring that between now and the next retro, that particular thing is addressed, and we kind of come back and say, actually, that's now working a lot better, and we're all a lot happier.
Yeah, it really resonates with me, the fact that what you just said, and the fact that it's not just about measuring, and it's not just about voicing your concern or being innovative or having ideas. It's also about being heard and implementing the changes that you need to implement behind it. It's not just thoughts and ideas and all of that. It's also action at the back of it to make sure that, okay, I've listened to you, I've heard you, but also great idea, we're going to implement that. And there is something that's happening at the back of it, because I think having sat on both sides of the team, there is nothing more frustrating than seeing a problem and having a solution to that problem, but no one wants to implement it, or no one wants to take ownership of that change. So yeah, really agree with that.
I want to take one more question from the audience. Core, I think you might be able to answer this. As a CTO, what steps can you take to manage the balance between prioritizing work-related stability versus growth?
Oh, that's a really big question, and I don't think it's the job of the CPTO on its own to decide what is the priority, whether it's stability or growth. I think it's a business decision overall. If you are in a situation where your tech lead decides whether you want to build a product for stability, so to, I don't know, reduce churn, for example, or maintain your customer base, or whether you want to grow, I think there is a problem. It has to be consensus at the leadership table, and to make sure that we all work towards the same objective. And it's also going back to Izan, what you said about the tech debt at the beginning, which was, a pain that I've felt, for them to understand what it means, like what is the tech debt, what it means to, always create. You want to create the prototype, you want to create the MVP, you want to create the MMP, but you have to understand that if you set really hard deadline and you deliver them, that is at the detriment of a lot of things that you need to do to create maturity in your product, foundational work, stability, make sure that it's very, the foundation is there to be able to grow afterwards and scale afterwards in a very solid ground. And that conversation can be very tricky, especially with salespeople, commercial people, marketing, CEO as well, to really make them understand, okay, there is a really good phase of growth. We now need to take a little bit of time to make sure that all of the foundation work is there, to really sustain the next phase growth that happens a little bit later down the line. So to me, it's kind of like alternating between checking the stability, making sure we do that foundational work, and then we grow, we achieve our target, we achieve our objective. We're doing this, but yeah, it's a combination of both.
Awesome.
I used to say something along the lines of, long after the sweetness of quick has been forgotten, the bitterness of dirty remains. So it's a very nice sentence to throw out if you are struggling to get the rest of the executive committee to understand that you can't always go quick. You have to take stock, and it doesn't help us if we gain a whole bunch of customers only to lose them because the product isn't available, or the product isn't reliable, or the product doesn't produce consistent results. So it's, as Cora said, it's a very much a balancing act of, step here, step there. We want to avoid premature optimization, but actually if we realize that something's working, we want to double down on it and, really focus on making sure that that's cemented and working well before we then kind of see what else and where we go from there.
I think it's funny because almost every company I've worked at has this problem, like stability versus growth. But at the same time, now having gone through like almost every time, it's like there is no growth if you're not stable, right? It's kind of silly to talk about it as two different things. They're actually the same thing. You just can't grow if you're not stable. Or otherwise, sometimes you call it the leaky bucket, right? You keep growing, but it just starts to leak on the other side. One thing that I've gradually learned over the years is it does not come on day one, right? Because when you're a startup, it's just not the highest priority. You want to get things off the ground. You want to validate your value proposition. You want to do so many other things that just doesn't come to your mind right away. But the key is at what point you really start to put in those measures. Like, how do you measure stability? That's what's going to define stability, right? Because if you keep talking about it, it's just going to be too many things and you'll never get the resource to do it. And it's hard to justify to other executives or stakeholders, like, why did you build something that's not stable? Like, how do you argue with that? Well, you told me to do it quickly. Well, I didn't tell you to do something that's not stable. Can't you do something quick and stable, right? So it becomes this never-ending conversation. So it's really having the right metrics in. I think having SLOs and SLIs help a lot, right? Really moving away from just measuring what you call like functional system level metrics, like APIs are working or not. But you want to now measure really, okay, if the APIs are working, why is it not being used for like 30 minutes? I think starting to have these metrics will help elevate or help others outside of engineering understand what is stability. And as we grow, but if we continue to grow, but our APIs are just faulting every day or every other day, and we take more than 60 minutes to recover from it, the growth is going to start to backfire. It's just going to be a lot more expensive for us to deal with a churn of a customer, let's say that's $20 million. I think it needs to be framed in a different way so the other executives understand that if, for whatever reason, the platform is not stable, how do we invest so that it becomes stable, that our customers eventually are going to be happy about it?
You've got the three aspects of quality, time, and cost, right? And you can't ever optimize across all three. So you have to pick two, knowing full well that the third one is going to suffer. And again, I find that quite because that's not tech specific. That applies in a lot of the rest of the real world. Coraline, with your background in construction, it's something that is often mentioned there as well.
It's a product mindset more than the tech mindset.
So, but again, it's a nice way of being very clear as, okay, you want me to, be quick and don't cost a lot. Quality isn't going to be great. If you're okay with that, that's what we will do. But if you want quality to be good and you want to be quick, it's going to cost you. And that way it makes it really easy to have those difficult conversations.
Yeah.
Awesome. So last question for today's conversation in the framework within our topic today, which is mastering transitions in startups, scale-ups, and beyond. From each of you, I'd like to hear about looking ahead. How do you see the role of a tech leader changing in the next 5 years? I'll go around my screen. So, Cor, you're first.
Oh, it's in the next 5 years. That's really interesting. It's funny. I spent quite a lot of time reflecting on what happened in the past couple of years, as opposed to really looking at what's going to happen in the past 5 years. It feels, if you look back at the next 5 years, 5 years ago, pre-COVID, I don't think anyone could have foreseen what the next 5 years would look like. I don't think anyone could have said, yeah, we're on the verge of a global pandemic that's going to change the way of working for everything, and then it's going to be a massive recession, and the market is going to be difficult, and we see a lot of product people, product leaders, being losing their job at the benefit of more hybrid roles such as CPTO, merge role, product with tech, or product with commercial, product with whatever. I'm hoping that that last phase of really difficult market, a very hard investment, especially in the startup world. It used to be a case where you had a tech product and you had AI in the title, and you would unlock investment. Not easily, it depends, but it was a little bit freer, rather than now. All of the seed series and series B have very defined metrics and targets that you need to achieve to be able to unlock those investments. That has become a lot more difficult and a lot more prescriptive as to what you have to achieve to get to what level. And we see loads of businesses going bust recently. I'm hoping, and I don't think it's necessarily all of it is not necessarily a bad thing. I think there were some very good learning points that we got from the past 5 years, and I really welcome them. But I'm hoping that the landscape is going to be a lot more hopeful and positive in the next 5 years than it was in the past 5 years. So it's a very loose, not specific answer to your question, but I'm always a little bit wary about making solid prognostic for the future, really.
It's fair enough. Hussein, what are your thoughts?
Yeah, I mean, I think I kind of agree with Caroline a lot, in the sense where change is the only constant, right? I think definitely everything is going to change. So I can maybe stab on what I think it would be for the CTO role. First of all, continuous learning, right? Like, I think learning has to be the most important key, because you just don't know what's in front of you. And from a CTO perspective, I think there's going to be a lot more need for the CTO to be, it's probably a wrong choice of words here, like business oriented, because if you're a C-level, you're obviously business oriented, but we know sometimes CTOs can be not so business oriented, so we're just so excited about building stuff. I think that's probably one of the things I see that needs to evolve, where CTOs will really need to understand business, finance, working closely with other executives, to help everyone understand how is the tech really enabling the business. I think there's also going to be a lot of nothing new now. I think it's quite old, AI and automation. I think that will be continuing to be a big thing for the next 5 years. And yeah, I mean, security is always an issue, right? We had a big security issue last week. I was stranded in the airport for a whole day because of that. So yeah, I mean, I feel it's definitely going to change. It definitely needs to evolve, and that's kind of what I feel it's going to do to a CTO role.
Last but not least, Kirsten.
So my my first thought when you asked the question was a lot less than we think. And it's interesting that Coraline reflected on 5 years ago, pre-pandemic. Obviously, that has changed a huge amount in how we work, how we operate. But it's also meant that as leaders, we had to adapt. We had to focus probably much more on the sort of softer skills, on the employee engagement, motivation, communicating of strategy, everything you sort of have taken for granted because people could sort of observe things in an office. We suddenly had to really focus on actively delivering. And I think that's a good thing, because I think it started to have or to create better conversations in organizations at all levels. And I think we're going to see more of that, because AI is obviously coming. It's going to remain very interesting in what shapes, sizes, forms, and regulations around it. But it's still a tool and still an enabler. I don't think it's going to replace people anywhere near at the rate that, the sort of media likes us to think, so that we click on an article to read it. AI will become a tool to make us more effective, to automate the things that, we don't want to do. There's some very, very good use cases for it, but it's not going to replace human innovation, insight, customer obsession. Right? All of these things are still going to be very much at the core of the CTO. And Hisam's point around, business-minded CTOs, I think that's very much a thing that will continue to grow, particularly as we're starting to see more technical representation among boards. Boards used to be dominated by finance people and lawyers and compliance people, and maybe an M&A guy or something. And we're increasingly seeing more diversity in the boardroom, where people are bringing in customer functions, marketing functions, and tech, because, cyber isn't going anywhere. It's only going to get worse. And people are starting to see technology as the business enabler that it is, and they want to understand it. They want to understand data. They want to, not be, people are scared of things they don't know, right? So the more we get representation at board, the more that CTO role within the organization is also going to become much more on an even keel with the rest of the executive team. So that's probably something that I would say is going to be a fairly dramatic shift over the next few years. But in the kind of, with the AI in the background, my immediate thought as well, much less than we probably fear at this point.
Great. That brings us to the end of today's conversation. So to our panelists, thank you so much for your time today and your insights. And to our audience, thank you for tuning in today. Our next Bytes session will be in September, so keep an eye out for dates. And if you enjoyed this session today, we'll be covering topics such as this one and more at our next conference, which is on the 24th to the 25th of September in Berlin. Hisam will be joining us as a speaker on a panel discussion, so you can come meet Hisam in person, and you can find out more on our website. So on behalf of CTO, thank you again to our panelists. Thank you again to our audience for tuning in, and we hope to see you again soon.
Pleasure to be here. Have a good day. Bye.
Bye.
Bye.